In the annals of naval engineering, there are ships, and then there is the Yamato. She was the physical manifestation of an empire's will, a 72,809-ton fortress of steel that defied the very concept of the horizon. Launched in the secret shipyards of Kur, she was built behind massive curtains of sisal rope to hide her scale from the world. She was the largest battleship ever constructed, carrying the weight of a nation's pride in her double-bottomed hull. In the industrial noir of the Japanese war machine, the Yamato wasn't just a weapon, she was a god. But by April 1945, the age of the gods was over. The era of the battleship, the heavy, grinding rule of big guns, was being systematically dismantled by the screaming flight decks of the American carriers. The Yamato was a masterpiece, born into a world that had already moved on. To stand on the deck of the Yamato was to stand on the peak of industrial achievement. Her primary armament consisted of 9 18.1-inch, 46 centimeters guns, the largest ever fitted to a warship. A single shell weighed 3,219 pounds, 1,460 kilograms, roughly the weight of a family car. When these guns fired, the overpressure was so intense it could strip the clothes off a sailor and destroy any unarmored lifeboats on deck. The ship was a labyrinth of 1,147 watertight compartments. Her armor belt was 16.1 inches thick, designed to withstand a direct hit from her own guns. But this mechanical perfection came with a cost. The Yamato was a hotel, a massive consumer of fuel and resources that Japan could no longer afford. She spent much of the war in harbor, a silent, rusted idol waiting for a decisive battle that the Americans refused to fight on her terms. She was a beautiful, lethal, and increasingly irrelevant piece of hardware. April 6, 1945. The American invasion of Okinawa had begun. The Japanese High Command, desperate and depleted, issued a final, suicidal order, Operation 10 Go. The Yamato, accompanied by a light cruiser and 8 destroyers, was to sail to Okinawa, beach herself, and act as a stationary fortress until she was destroyed. There was no air cover. There was only enough fuel for a one-way trip. This was industrial noir at its most tragic. The ultimate machine being sent to its death as a tokotai, a suicide weapon. The crew knew the math. They spent their final night on board drinking the last of the ship's sake and writing letters that would never be delivered. The boilers were stoked one last time. The 150,000 shaft horsepower turbines screaming as the Yamato turned her bow toward the American fleet. She wasn't sailing to win. She was sailing to become a monument of fire. At 12:32 p.m. on April 7th, the radar operators on the Yamato saw the end of the world. A massive swarm of American aircraft, over 300 planes from Task Force 58, was closing in. The American strategy was cold and calculated. They didn't just want to sink the ship, they wanted to dismantle it. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher's pilots had a specific plan. They were ordered to hit the Yamato on only one side, the port side. By concentrating all torpedo hits on one flank, they would force the ship to capsize, preventing her from using her massive internal pumps to balance the water. The industrial noir of the battle was a symphony of precision. Hellcats suppressed the anti-aircraft guns with rockets and strafing runs, while Avengers and Helldivers waited for their window to deliver the killing blow to the hull. The American pilots weren't just attacking, they were performing a mechanical dissection. By 12:45 p.m., the Yamato was under the weight of an unprecedented aerial assault. The sky was a chaotic tapestry of anti-aircraft bursts and screaming engines, but beneath the noise was a cold mathematical strategy. Every torpedo bomber was ordered to strike the port side. The logic was brutal. If they hit both sides, the ship might stay level as it sank. But by hammering only the left, they forced the Yamato to lean. The ship's massive anti-aircraft batteries, designed to track targets at high altitudes, found themselves unable to aim as the deck tilted. The 18.1-inch guns, the pride of the fleet, became useless as their hydraulic rotation systems struggled against the mounting list. The industrial noir of the battle was the sight of a 72,000-ton god being slowly tipped over by the persistence of hundreds of small, buzzing machines. By 1:30 p.m., the list reached a critical 15 degrees. The massive internal pumps, capable of moving thousands of tons of water, were failing. Inside the ship, the situation was a nightmare of iron and steam. Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito faced an impossible choice: let the ship capsize and die, or perform a desperate counter-flood. He gave the order to flood the starboard engine and boiler rooms. These weren't empty spaces. There were hundreds of engineers and stokers at their posts, keeping the ship's heart beating. They were given no warning. The valves were open, and the freezing sea rushed in, drowning hundreds of loyal sailors in an instant to balance the weight of the steel. It was a cold, industrial sacrifice, men used as ballast to keep a dying machine upright for just a few more minutes. The Yamato steadied for a moment, but the price was her last bit of mobility. She was now a sitting duck in a graveyard of her own making. As the Yamato slowed, her defensive cloud evaporated. The ship was covered in over 150 anti-aircraft guns, but they were being systematically silenced. American Hellcats dove through the smoke, their .50 caliber machine guns and rockets shredding the exposed gun crews. The deck of the Yamato was no longer a platform of war. It was an industrial slaughterhouse. The smoke from the burning fuel oil was so thick that the gunners couldn't see their targets until it was too late. Communication lines were severed. The industrial noir reached its peak in the fragmentation of the ship's soul. Each gun mount became its own isolated island of desperation, firing blindly into the gray sky. The mechanical perfection of the Kure shipyards was being torn apart by the raw, grinding friction of massed air power. The Yamato was still firing, But she was no longer a ship. She was a bleeding iron mountain. At 2 p.m., the killing blow arrived. A final wave of torpedoes from the USS Yorktown's Avengers struck the port side again, deep below the armor belt. The internal bulkheads finally gave way. The list surged past 20 degrees. On the bridge, Admiral Ito realized the end had come. He ordered the crew to abandon ship, but for many, it was too late. The ship was rolling so fast that the massive 18.1-inch turrets, each weighing more than a whole destroyer, began to shift in their mounts. The sound was a low, terrifying groan of tortured metal. The Yamato was turning over, her great masts dipping into the sea. In the industrial Noir of the Pacific, the greatest battleship ever built was performing its final slow-motion somersault into the abyss. But the tragedy wasn't over. As the ship capsized, the volatile contents of her magazines were about to create a final, cataclysmic signature. At 2:23 p.m., the Yamato reached her final tipping point. As she capsized, the unthinkable happened. The massive shells in her forward magazines, each weighing over 3,000 pounds, slid out of their racks and struck the bulkheads. The friction ignited the propellant. The resulting explosion was one of the largest non-nuclear detonations in history. A pillar of fire and smoke erupted from the ocean, reaching 20,000 feet into the air. The blast was so powerful that it was seen by observers on the coast of Kyushu, over 120 miles away. It didn't just sink the ship, it obliterated the central section of the hull, tearing the Yamato into two massive pieces of jagged, screaming iron. For the American pilots flying above, the sky suddenly turned from a battlefield into a furnace. The blast was so violent that it even knocked several circling American aircraft out of the sky. The Yamato didn't go quietly. She exited the world with a roar that shook the tectonic plates of the Pacific. As the smoke cleared, the ocean surface was a graveyard of oil, debris, and 2,498 men who had gone down with the ship. Only 269 survivors remained. But beneath the waves, the story of the Yamato was entering its final mechanical phase. The two halves of the ship began their long, silent descent toward the sea floor, 1,120 feet below. Because of the explosion, the hull was a mangled wreck. As the pieces plummeted, the immense pressure of the deep ocean began to crush the air-filled voids of the double-bottom hull. The internal bulkheads, once the pride of Japanese engineering, buckled and collapsed under the weight of the water. The Yamato wasn't just sinking. She was being compressed by the abyss. By the time the bow and stern sections struck the silt, they were miles apart, surrounded by a debris field of twisted turrets, scattered shells, and the silent ghosts of an empire's ambition. In 1985, and later in more detail during the 1990s, underwater expeditions finally located the remains of the Yamato in the East China Sea. What they found was a landscape of industrial Noir, frozen in time. The ship sits in two primary pieces. The bow section lies upright, its massive anchor chains still draped over the side like rusted vines. The stern section lies upside down, nearby. The 18.1-inch turrets, the most powerful guns ever mounted on a ship, had fallen out during the capsize and now lie scattered on the seabed, half buried in the mud. There is no light at this depth, only the cold, rhythmic pulse of ROV cameras. To look at these remains is to see the end of an era. The Yamato was the ultimate expression of the big gun philosophy, but her rusted bones are proof that in the age of the aircraft carrier and the missile, size was no longer a shield. She is a monument to the friction between traditional honor and modern industrial slaughter. The Yamato remains a polarizing symbol. To some, she is a tragic victim of a lost cause. To others, a terrifying reminder of the cost of imperial hubris. But from a purely mechanical and historical perspective, she is the steel cathedral that marked the end of the battleship's 1,000-year reign. When she vanished beneath the waves, the world changed. The battleship, the heavy Iron King of the sea, was dead. The future belonged to the flight decks and the invisible technology of the new age. The Yamato is gone, but the story of her 72,000 tons of defiance continues to fascinate. She reminds us that even the most formidable machines are eventually consumed by time, tide, and the relentless progress of human conflict. Thank you for exploring the industrial noir of the Imperial Japanese Navy with us. If the story of the Yamato moved you, subscribe and hit the bell for our next descent into history. Our next journey takes us to the Gray Ghost, the USS Enterprise, the ship that lived through the hell that the Yamato could not survive. See you in the dark.